All right, so the Shaw Classic is in the books. Here are my thoughts on how Fullstrength.ai performed at both the expo and during the Raw Max deadlift. The good, the bad, the ugly. All right, in terms of the expo, everything was really incredible. I mean, this was year 2 of the expo at the Shaw Classic. Saw a lot of the same vendors, a bunch of new vendors. Interestingly, Brian is real big in technology, and he's really like focusing on incorporating more technology into strength sports. And this was the first year where technology was closely, so controls packages and data analytics were tightly coupled with the show. And I think we got a chance to see what the potential is. There were a lot of hiccups. Obviously, there's hiccups in the first time you do anything. We learned a lot. Fullstrength.ai learned a lot about video production, and I mean, it's kind of crazy if you're back in a production truck and you see how a live stream or a video event is put on. It's just a bunch of people with their running around with their hair on fire, and they churn out a world-class production. And Charlie, who's the producer of the show, just did a ridiculous job. His team is incredible. The thing that stood out about the expo was that last year it was really super, super heavy on Friday, which was the first day of the Open. The pros weren't competing, and like everybody came on Friday, and we were just fucking inundated. 8 straight hours of people deadlifting, and we tried to fit our lunches in. And this year it was that way for the first 5 hours. So what people realized was that the expo was going on all 3 days. And so this year, you had the participants more evenly spread out. It was still crazy. We still had a line for all 3 days. Friday was definitely, I would say Friday and Sunday morning, for all day, Friday until about 2 in the afternoon, and then Sunday morning were definitely the craziest days of the expo. But one of the big things that stood out was that it wasn't nearly as, people understood, okay, the expo is going on multiple days. I don't have to be there on day one, So that was cool. There were a lot of great vendors there, a lot more in technology. Mitch Hooper had his own booth for his Lift Heavy Be Kind brand. That was really cool. They moved the speakers to it. They expanded the expo so that the arm wrestling and the speakers was going on like as an extension of the expo. And they leased out the other half of the building. So now you didn't have all these people sitting there was more room in the expo because last year there were chairs set up and a stage right where the expo was, and like everybody was crammed into one room. This year they went over to a room right next to it. They were connected, and that actually made the feel a lot better. So the expo was a huge hit. I think we had the 2 big things that stood out was we had, I think, about 300 people lift over the 3 days. We weren't open on the expo during the second half of day on Saturday, so we were only open until like 11 o'clock, and then we had to leave to go set up for the Raw Max deadlift. So we were only at the expo for 2 hours on Saturday, all day Friday, and then until, I think we stayed open at the expo until 2 o'clock because there were a long line of people who still wanted to lift, and so we kept the booth open so everybody could lift if they wanted to. So that was number one. Like, we had 300 something people lift across the 3 days. That's a lot. It was about what we had last year. Number 2, the number of people who brought back the results from last year to compare them to this year, or the number of people who said, hey, I took what you guys taught me last year and applied it, and here are the results, was astounding. I mean, it was dozens of people. And last year when we left the expo, we had, over the next 6 months, we had, probably 20 people, I would say, tagged us on Instagram and tagged us with a video where they did a deadlift, and they said, hey, I met these guys at Shaw Classic. They told me I could deadlift X. I believed I could only deadlift Y. Holy shit, they were right. I actually could pull X. All right, so the expo, I would give 4 out of 5 for me, for our team, the performance of our team, and the experience 4 out of 5, 4.5 out of 5. I never give 5s. So that's about as high a score as I ever give. All right, the live stream. So the first 2 years, we would do analysis of the athletes in real time and record their videos, but that data was isolated. It was just us doing it, and we had the ability to go back and reanalyze data. I could reanalyze a video if I missed a calculation. So I guess it's important to explain like how the vision system actually works. So when we're monitoring a deadlift, what we are doing, we've written a bunch of algorithms that give us the ability to do this, machine learning algorithms. We've trained models to be able to do what I'm about to describe. So what we do is our camera looks at you, looks at an athlete, and identifies that you're getting ready to do a deadlift. And we have a model that starts calculating your pose. So we're able to turn the movement, the human body, into a shape. So when the deadlift starts, we start plotting a curve, and that curve is what we refer to as your lift curve. We generate your lift, and we put your lift into a shape on a chart. So if you pull 3 times, we can see 3 repetitions as a shape, and you can compare those shapes. The resolution is so high because we're pulling it at 30 or 60 frames a second that we're able to see the slightest movement, the slightest change in your biomechanics. So we also plot a center of gravity. So we're able to see how the weight is distributed across the body. All right, so that's element 1. Element 2 is we are calculating the velocity of the lift. So we have a model that we train that gives us the ability to calculate the velocity of your lift throughout the entire curve. So there is a corresponding graph that goes with the lift curve that shows us what the velocity was throughout the lift, okay? That velocity is we primarily plot it because for velocity-based training, but really what we're using that velocity for is to use it in conjunction with the weight to calculate force. Force, in conjunction with the lift curve, will tell us what the ultimate potential is, okay? So we use those 3 variables together to say, here is how the potential 1 rep max. All right, so here's an interesting thing though that I don't think most people understand. We are calculating maximum weight that can be moved on every single frame of the video. So if the lift takes 30, it takes 3 seconds, and the video is operating at 30 frames per second, we have 90 calculations. There's 1 max calculation for each frame. Those max calculations are then plotted in a 1 rep max curve. So if you look at someone's 1 rep max, that 1 rep max is gonna look something like this. If they're really, really strong off the floor, but and it's linear, it's a linear digression, so they get weaker and weaker and weaker as they get the lockout, then their curve is gonna look like that, a 45-degree angle coming down. If they're really strong, if they're really weak off the floor, but they're strong in the lockout, then it's linear, and it's going to be a 45-degree angle generally going left to right. Most 1 rep max curves look something like this. They're wavy. So someone might be equally strong off the floor and at lockout, but be drastically weaker during the transfer of weight at the knees. So when the weight transfers to the lower back, almost exclusively the lower back and the hip flexors and your hamstrings for the final lockout, there's a transfer of weight at the knees. This is why people get stuck at the knees. That weight transfers to different muscles. So we're calculating 1 rep max all the way through. All right, so I'm going to talk about the good things first. The good things are, it looked incredible. All the fans that sent us a feedback, like using the replay, using our replay during the live stream, were like, whoa, this is awesome. It's a game changer. You know, the downside is that some of those numbers weren't accurate. We had to build a whole UI. They were actual numbers. They were actual calculations. 2 of them were not. They were actually fat fingered in. I'll explain how that happened. But they were the actual numbers along the 1 rep max curve, but they were the wrong number that went into the replay. And we couldn't fix it. There was no way we just had to live with it. And then we would tell the producer, yeah, go ahead and use that one. Don't use it. It's close enough or whatever. Some of them were spot on. So of the 32 lifts that we analyzed, so we did all around 1, all around 2, there were 3 lifts where we didn't analyze at all. One of Alexei Novikov's, we didn't have the weight. We didn't hear the weight through the headset, so we didn't know what weight he was pulling, so we couldn't put it in to do the analysis. We have to know what weight he's actually pulling. So the workflow was like this. And we basically had 17 seconds on every lift. It was nuts compared to the other years. You know, video production is a whole other ballgame. We had to build a new UI. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we had to develop just for this show that is in addition to the existing vision system. And it was worth it, and we're glad we did it, and we're going to do it again. I mean, it was awesome. It's only going to get better next year. That's the ultimate result. But there were hiccups this year that we went through. And, you know, one of them was my own. So the way it worked was we analyzed all the lifts in the first round. I would say of the 16 lifts, we got analysis on 12 of them. Yeah, I'm going to say we got analysis on 12 of the 16 lifts. We either had the weight, maybe the camera wasn't in the right position, whatever it was. And then the other one was, and of the 12 that we did the analysis on, 11 of the calculations were correct. Okay, the one calculation they used in the replay, which was Mitch Hooper's, which was a 1070. The one we had an actual replay, the one that they used, the 1070, that wasn't accurate. It was actually that 1070 was that calculation, the 1 rep max calculation, was done right at his lockout of his lift, and it was actually it was literally the weight that he could hold in his hand and rock back and forth with. It wasn't a meaningful 1 rep max calculation. Mitch Hooper's maximum weight that he could carry through a repetition is over 1,000 pounds, though. All right. So after the first round, I had to run out and I had to do an interview on the floor with Terry Hollins. So I literally run out of the production truck. I run to the back. I'm out of breath. I get out on the floor. They throw it to Terry, and I didn't remember the questions they were going to ask me because I'm obviously focused on doing the analysis of the data. And I misspoke. I misspoke. So the highest calculation we got was Thor. We calculated that Thor could get 1,100 pounds off the floor. 1,100 pounds is just under 500 kg. I think 500 kg is like 1,102 or something. But so we calculated Thor could get 1,000 pounds off the floor. He could lock out 1050. In the interview, and that was in round 1. In the interview, I said he could do 1,100. Really, he could get 1,100 off the floor. He could lock out 1050. But Matt Ragg, we calculated that he could actually pull 1,000 pounds. So, but I said 1,100. I misspoke because I had said 1,100 with Thor, and then I said 1,000. And it's like, you don't get a chance to fix that. It's live. It's like, so one of the things I learned was I'm going to carry a note with me next time. That being said, the ultimate result was most of the data that we put up on the screen was accurate. The vast majority of the calculations that went up on the screen were the correct calculations. That is, if you looked at that rep, and by the way, we're not analyzing the human being, we're analyzing the repetition. We're saying, based on that repetition, we're turning that rep into a shape and doing calculations on it. The vast majority were correct. I'm a highly critical person of myself, so it's like, and our team, and I'm like, I want all the calculations to be right. And next year, knowing what we know now, we will incorporate those lessons learned to make sure that every single replay is a number that the audience will be meaningful to the audience. This year it was more testing, but I want to finish with this. We were testing the audience. But I want to say this. There was one big thing that really freaked me out. In the very beginning of the days when we did this, the athletes were never supposed to see the numbers in real time. They were never supposed to see the numbers as they were happening because they didn't want that shit in their head. We did not know, but they were showing the live stream up in the backstage. And Smash Andrade told me, and he's a Texas guy, I know I've talked to him before. He told me that he looked at our number in the second round and he made his decision on what he would pull in the third round based on our number. And we're going to go work with him. We're going to go film him in one of his workouts. And that was incredible. But what was even crazier was we put 1,000 pounds up there and he pulled 961 clean, nice and easy. So with that, I mean, it was definitely worth it. There's a lot we learned from it. I hope the fans loved it, and we'll see you guys next year.